World is waking up. The end of world organizations owned by the cabal. The world is waking up, despite the concerted efforts of some to suppress this growing movement. For years, those in power have attempted to manipulate public perception, labeling the exposure of their misdeeds as conspiracy theories or cover-ups. Yet, the truth is becoming harder to ignore. The hidden hand of global elites, those who rule the world through their proxies, is being laid bare, and the criminals behind the facade are slowly being exposed. Nowhere is this more evident than in the United Kingdom, where the newly formed Keir Starmer government serves as a prime example of this repression. Citizens who dare to speak out against the crimes of the ruling elite and the influence of their secretive cabal find themselves imprisoned, further proving the lengths to which these forces will go to silence dissent. The UN, a puppet of the elite? The United Nations was founded in 1945 with the stated purpose of promoting global cooperation, peace, and security. However, many critics argue that the UN has strayed far from its original mission and is now little more than a puppet for global elites, such as the Rockefellers and their allies. The Rockefeller family's deep financial and political connections to the UN, exemplified by their donation of land for the UN headquarters in New York, raise questions about the true nature of the organization. Rather than working for the collective good of humanity, the UN has often acted to maintain the power of global elites and to secure their economic interests. For example, the UN's handling of international conflicts has been consistently inadequate. From the Rwandan genocide to the wars in Syria and Yemen, the UN has proven unable or unwilling to prevent mass atrocities. In each case, powerful countries have used their influence within the UN to block meaningful intervention, rendering the organization ineffective. The UN Security Council, dominated by 5 permanent members with veto power, operates more as a battleground for the interests of these nations than as a body committed to maintaining global peace. This has allowed violent conflicts to persist while the underlying structures of control remain intact, all under the guise of diplomacy. The IMF and World Bank, instruments of economic subjugation. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank were established to stabilize global economies and promote development. In practice, however, these institutions have often been tools for economically subjugating nations, particularly those in the developing world. Instead of providing genuine assistance, the IMF and World Bank impose harsh austerity measures as conditions for loans. These measures force countries to cut public services, privatize industries, and open their economies to foreign exploitation, conditions that disproportionately harm local populations while benefiting multinational corporations and the financial elite. One of the most glaring examples is the Eurozone debt crisis, particularly in Greece. The IMF's austerity measures plunged Greece into a deep economic depression, causing widespread poverty, unemployment, and social unrest. Public services were gutted, pensions slashed, and wages cut, all while international banks and financial institutions profited. This is a clear example of how the IMF operates more as an enforcer of financial dominance than as an organization committed to improving the lives of ordinary people. Similar patterns can be seen in countries across Africa and Latin America, where IMF policies have often worsened economic conditions. In Argentina, for instance, the IMF's structural adjustment programs led to skyrocketing inflation, unemployment, and social instability. Local economies are often destroyed by these policies, while foreign corporations and investors reap the benefits of the economic liberalization forced upon them. This cycle of exploitation has led to increasing criticism of the IMF and World Bank as instruments of economic control rather than forces for good, failing in global health crises. The World Health Organization, WHO, has also come under fire, particularly for its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. While the WHO claims to be a global health authority, it has been accused of prioritizing the interests of powerful pharmaceutical companies over the welfare of the global population. The organization's close relationship with major donors like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which holds significant sway over global health policy, has raised concerns about undue influence. During the pandemic, the WHO's inconsistent messaging on issues such as masks, treatments, and vaccines fueled confusion and mistrust. Critics argue that the organization placed too much emphasis on promoting vaccines developed by major pharmaceutical companies, while ignoring or sidelining cheaper, and potentially effective treatments. Furthermore, the WHO's apparent reluctance to confront China about the origins of the virus in Wuhan added to accusations of bias and political influence. These examples illustrate how the WHO, rather than serving global health interests, often acts in favor of the powerful entities that fund and control it. UNCTAD and UNICEF, failed promises. Organizations like UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and UNICEF, United Nations Children's Fund, further demonstrate the failures of these global institutions. UNCTAD was supposed to represent the interests of developing nations in the global trade system, yet it has done little to challenge the dominance of wealthy nations and corporations. Instead of fostering equitable trade relations, it has mostly been a forum for rhetoric, with little real impact on the systemic injustices faced by developing economies. UNICEF, tasked with protecting children's rights and welfare, has been mired in scandals of abuse and exploitation. Reports of sexual abuse committed by UN peacekeepers and staff have surfaced in countries like Haiti and the Democratic Republic of Congo, revealing the dark underbelly of these institutions. Instead of serving the world's most vulnerable, UNICEF's leadership has often been more focused on maintaining its image and securing funding from powerful donors than addressing the root causes of child poverty and exploitation. BRICS, a new power emerging. In recent years, the BRICS nations have recognized the limitations and corruption of these global institutions and have begun taking steps to distance themselves from them. By cutting off financial support to organizations like the UN and developing their own cooperative frameworks, BRICS represents a shift toward a multipolar world order. One of the most notable examples is the creation of the New Development Bank, NDB, which aims to provide financial assistance to developing nations without imposing the harmful conditions of the IMF and World Bank. Moreover, BRICS countries are increasingly reducing their reliance on the US dollar for international trade, a move that threatens the dominance of Western financial institutions. As these nations work to build alternative systems of cooperation and development, the global power dynamic is beginning to shift. This signals a growing recognition that the current global institutions, which were supposedly established to protect humanity, have instead been serving the interests of a powerful elite. The UK, a prime example of suppression. The UK under the Keir Starmer government is a striking example of the lengths to which the ruling class will go to maintain control and silence those who oppose them. Starmer's government has been accused of imprisoning citizens who dare to speak out against the crimes of the elite and the influence of their cabal. The very system that is supposed to uphold democracy and free speech is being used to suppress dissent, revealing the deep corruption within the political establishment. Those who expose the truth about these elites are silenced under the guise of maintaining order, further solidifying the power of the ruling class. Conclusion. The world is indeed waking up to the reality that global institutions like the UN, IMF, WHO, and others are not the benevolent forces they claim to be. These organizations have consistently served the interests of a wealthy, powerful elite while exploiting, oppressing, and marginalizing the very populations they are supposed to protect. As nations like those in BRICS begin to challenge this global order, there is hope that a more just and equitable world system can emerge. However, as seen in the UK, those in power will go to great lengths to suppress this awakening, using political repression to maintain control. The exposure of these global elites and their proxies is an important step toward reclaiming power for the people and breaking free from the domination of corrupt international organizations.